Okay, so yeah, I think we're ready to make a start. If you want to, by the way, I think there's quite a few of you in this spreadsheet already. If you didn't want to make a copy, you can literally just view this document. If it's easier for you to view this document rather than watch it on my screen share, if it's easier for you to watch the spreadsheet and watch it live here, you can just open it up. Don't make a copy if you don't want to and watch it, but by all means make a copy and kind of do it yourself as well while we're going through. This is the same course that I do in person with schools. That's where I've got tasks down the side here that I would normally get you all to carry out in an in-person training session. So feel free to do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through the tasks in front of you so that you can see how they're all done. So let's start out nice and simple then. So what have we got? We've got 9 people who've done 3 different tests, and this is just a sample of some made-up data. So it's 9 people, 3 tests, test 1, 2, and 3. The important thing to note is that these tests are out of 20, so that'll become useful later for things like averages and percentages. It's a test with a maximum score of 20. This data can be anything. It could be something that you could have asked all the kids for their favourite food, foundation phase. You can go out and find objects around the house or around the class that fit into a category, whether it's colour, shape, size, things like that. And obviously comprehensive, it can be a lot more in-depth, so it could be something like this, maybe on a bigger scale, multiple test scores. It's the same skill, it's the same formulas essentially that we're going to use, whether you're dealing with 9 people or whether you're dealing with 9,000 people. So it's just a manageable set of data, essentially. So the first task that we want to do is work out the total score for each pupil in column E. So spreadsheets are split into columns, so A to Z and on, if you want to add as many columns as you want to. And you've got rows down the left-hand side, 1 to 1,000,000, if you want, as many rows as you want and as many columns as you want. So in column E, I want to work out the total for Tom, and Jonathan, Mark, and Tim. They're all their test scores. You could just manually work it out. You could do 12 plus 15 plus 16 and manually work it out for everyone. And I did get someone ask that at a training session, why do we get spreadsheets to do this when it can do it for you? And maybe if you're dealing with 9 data points, that's not too much of a task. When you're dealing with much bigger sets of data, obviously it takes much longer. And also there's more chance of you making a mistake, essentially. So if you want data to be accurate, making sure that you haven't made a mistake and the computer's added it up obviously helps to ensure the accuracy of the data. So we want to put a formula in here. So in cell E2 to begin with, we want to put a formula that's going to work out the total of these 3 test scores. Now, pretty much, I think every single formula, bar maybe 1 or 2, starts with the equals sign. So every time you want to do a formula, you'll be starting off with the equals sign. One thing that Google Sheets does, which is nice, is it looks at where you are in terms of cell E2 here, and it looks at what data is around it. So it looks above and says, right, you're in a column, and the word total is above you. You've got 3 bits of data to the left. There's a high probability that what you want to do is do this formula, equals sum B2 to D2. So I could just click on that and it would put the right formula in. But let's have a look at what we're actually doing, what this formula means. So equals means that we're doing a formula. The formula that we want to use is a sum. So an addition or a subtraction. So we're going to use a sum. So let's type it out rather than cheat and use as suggestions. So let's type out equals sum. And it wants to know what are we adding up. So there's 2 ways you can do it. You could either B2 plus C2 plus D2. Not too bad with only 3 data points. But in Google Sheets, just like it is in Excel, if you put it into a bracket to show what you're going to be adding up, and the cell that we're going to go from is B2, which is that initial one there. So we type in B2, and instead of going plus C2 plus D2, and especially if you've got 20 different data points to add up, you can just use the colon, and then where we want to end is at column D2. And then we close the bracket and press enter. And that gives us our total for those 3 lines. Again, it's got a suggested autofill, so it assumes rightly that I'm going to want to do the same formula for all of these different rows as well. Excuse me. So it assumes I'm going to want to do the same formula for all of these rows. And you could just press tick and it'll do that. But because I want to show you how to do it in case this doesn't come up, I'm going to reject that for a second. The easiest way to do it is click on the cell, and in the bottom right-hand corner we have this little square. So I can click on that square and drag down to the bottom here, let go, and it's going to, not exactly, but copy the formula all the way down. The one thing that it changes on every row is that it goes from B2 to B3, and then to B4, and then to B5, because we need to be adding up the total of this row. So although we started out with B2 to D2, when you drag the column down, it changes the row that it is associated with, because it knows what row it's on. This formula was made on row 2, and it applies to numbers on row 2. So this one is on row 3, so it adds up the numbers for row 3. So you don't have to type it individually on every row. Just click on this little square and drag it right the way down. So that's nice and simple. That's how you add things up. I haven't put a specification on what total, what kind of decimal points I need. I do that on the second one. But with something like this, when your points are just 12 or 15 and there's no decimal points, it doesn't really make sense to have the total include decimal points, because there's no benefit. It's always going to be 0.00 when there are no decimal points over here. So what we can do is, if I click on the top cell, anytime I want to select a selection of information, whether that's in a spreadsheet or whether that's a list of files or documents that you've got in your My Documents folder or anywhere else, you can click on the very top item in that list, hold down Shift on your keyboard and click on the bottom one, and that will select everything between those 2 points. And then in Google Sheets at the top here, we've got an increase or a decrease decimal places. So I can just drop that down to 0, because we don't need them. They're not adding anything to this spreadsheet, because they're all full round numbers anyway. Any questions about task 1? Everyone okay with that? Yeah, any questions you have, just pop them into the chat anyway. Now I'll jump onto those. So task 2, in column F, which is this column here, work out the average score for each pupil to 2 decimal places, or 2 decimal points. So we're going to do a formula in here again. So we start out with the equal sign. The formula for working out average is literally the word average, and then just after that is exactly the same formula, but there is something different about this. Now, what I found difficult with online training is the lack of immediate feedback of obviously a room full of people. I'm sure you've found this with doing live lessons. So every now and again, I will open up questions to you. Looking at this here, so the average, it's suggesting that I do average B2 to E2. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this and why that is not the formula that I want to use? Either unmute your mic if you want, or pop it into the chat. Yes, Davis, you don't need E2. So it's pretty intelligent, but it thinks that I want the average of all of the numbers in front of here, and it's including the total column. So if I do an average of B2 to E2, which is what it suggested, it's going to include the total in my average, which is obviously not what I want. So let's type in equals average. And that's why I'd always rather show you the formulas, because the suggestions aren't always right. And then we're going to do the exact same formula that we did for total. We're going to do the average. We're going to do an open bracket. Now you can type in B2 to D2, like we did earlier, but just to show you another method, you can click on the cell that you want to reference. So if I click on a B2, it's going to put B2 into my formula. You can do colon and click on D2 if you want, or if you remember I said that if you click on the top item in a list and then hold down Shift and click on the bottom item, it will select them all. If I click on B2, hold down Shift and click on D2, it's going to select those and it's going to put those cells into the formula. So you can either type them, if you find it easier to just literally type B2 colon D2, that's fine. Or you can click and drag. Sometimes it's easier if you're adding up like a large set, kind of from B2 over to H21 or something like that. Sometimes it's easier to literally drag and drop, or to click on the cell if you can see it but you're not sure what column it's in. Either way works perfectly well. I'm just going to put a closed bracket in there and press enter. That's going to give me the average, and this time I'm going to press the tick on the suggested autofill because that's right. That's going to autofill this same formula all the way down. But just to remind you, if you do want to copy a formula from one cell right the way down, just click on this little square in the corner and drag it down, and it will copy that formula all the way down. Now, it's already to 2 decimal points, but if you wanted to change it, just to remind you, select the text, the cell, that you want to change, and then the decimal points increase or decrease is just at the top there. Now, percentage. It's similar but not quite the same. There is something to know about the way that percentages work in Google Sheets. Now, in column G, work out the percentage score for each pupil. Anyone want to tell me what we do to work out a percentage score? So that's why I said it was important that these tests are up to 20, just so you know that the total possible score is 20 times 3. If anyone wants to pop it into the chat. We're going to start with an equals because it's a formula. I'll give you another couple of seconds if anyone wants to tell me the answer. I'll make a start, and if someone jumps in, that's fine. We're going to do a sum. So we're going to do a maths equation just like we did for total. So we're going to start out with equals sum. And we're going to do an open bracket because that's where we're going to put the sums inside this open bracket. We're going to choose, so the way to work out a sum, to work out a percentage is the score, so the total score divided by the total possible score, and then multiply that by 100. So we take E2, which is the total that they scored, divide it by 60, so / is division in any spreadsheet. And so you've got the plus symbol is plus, minus is minus, / is divide, and multiplication is shift and 8, the little star to do multiplication. So E2 divided by 60, and then what you would normally do is in a proper maths scenario, you would times this by 100, and that will give you 71.67%. Now, I'm just going to ignore the autofill for a second. So this is not specific to Google Sheets. This is just the maths equation for working out a percentage. So it's you take the total that they got, divided by the total that they could have possibly got, which is 60, and then times that by 100 to get the percentage score. One little quirk of Google Sheets, I'm not sure if Excel does this, but I know that Google Sheets does. These cells here are formatted as a number. So it does it automatically, usually, based on what you put into that cell. But when we select these cells on the spreadsheet, just in the top here, you can either click on the 1, 2, 3 where it says more formats here, and these are all the different types of formatting that you can put into a cell, or you can get to this menu by going to format and number at the top. It's the same list, it's in 2 places. The reason it's important to know that you can change what Google Sheets thinks is in that cell is because if you put in a date, if I wrote a date, this date is written American, Y is 26th of September 2008, it's just showing you the layout of this date. Just to derail this for 1 second, if I was to write in this cell, what's the date today, the 4th of the 2nd, 2021, Google Sheets doesn't know that this is a date. At the moment, it thinks that this is just some text that's been put in a field. So if I wanted to work out, for example, how long it's been since this date, there's a formula that you can type in to show how long has it been, how many days has it been since this date. Google Sheets can't do that unless you tell it that this cell, which it thinks is just text, is actually a date. With percentages, we can tell Google Sheets that these cells are going to contain percentages. So I can go to the little drop down of numbers and I can choose %. It will include a percentage symbol then, if I tell it that it's going to be a percent. But what happens when I choose percentage is it changes it to 7,166%. Basically, if you've told Google Sheets that this cell is going to contain a percentage, you don't actually need this part of the formula, the times by 100. So it's one of those things you've got to decide, I guess, when you're teaching the pupils, is that the correct way to work out the percentage that somebody got is to do this formula, including the times 100 bit at the end. But if you want it to appear in Google Sheets with a percentage symbol at the end, you can't include the times 100 part. Basically, you're telling Google Sheets that this is a percentage, so it knows that if you're putting this formula in, it knows what to show it as, because 71.67 is the numerical version of 71.67%. So that's just something to know. Basically, is that, yeah, if you've told Google Sheets that all of these cells here are going to be a percentage, we don't need the multiplied by 100 on the end of here. So if you're wondering why you're getting ridiculously large numbers, like over 100% for a total, for working out possible scores, just bear that in mind. But obviously, it can confuse the kids if you're telling them before you get to a spreadsheet how to work out a percentage, and then suddenly they don't need that times by 100. So just bear that in mind. I hope that kind of explained that in a clear enough way for you. If you're confused by anything, just let me know. So we've done task number 3. So in column G, work out a percentage score for each pupil. So we've got the percentage scores there. Again, if you didn't want the decimal point, we could get rid of that, just to have round percentages there if we want. Next is change the formatting in, well, I've put here column A and row 1 to make the heading stand out more. But essentially what I wanted you to do was just make this look a bit nicer. So at the moment it's really boring looking, it's just black text on a white background. So there's a few different ways that you can do it. One of the easiest is if you click in the top left hand corner, so where I've got name, hold down shift and click in the bottom right hand corner, it selects everything between those 2 points. So it highlights everything. And then just like you've got in every other document program, so Word, Google Docs, everything like that, you've got the formatting options at the top of the page, and fill is just up here. If I click on fill, I don't want this all to be in one color, so I just do it all in orange. It maybe looks better, but it still doesn't look very good. So if I click on the fill, I can come down to alternating colors. What this does is let you choose a color scheme. So we'll go with maybe a yellowy orange color over here. It will give you, you've got the option here of having a header row. If you had a total at the bottom, because I mean it wouldn't work with this kind of list, but if you also included maybe like a subtotal at the bottom, you could also include a footer row, so that's got a slightly different color. But for this case, it doesn't matter, we haven't got anything, any kind of sums at the bottom, so we don't need a footer. You can come down and customize the colors. You can change the alternating colors. What this does is essentially helps you make sure that you're on the same line. It helps you stick to, if you're looking at Rien here, for example, and the data is further over, you can make sure that you're sticking to the same line. You don't have to get a ruler or something and put it on the screen to try and make sure you're on the same row. So that's just a really easy way of saying done, and now we've got all these different colors on here to help read it a little bit easier. One thing to know, not that we'd need it for a spreadsheet this size, because we're not really going to be moving away from this view. If you did have a large spreadsheet, you can go to View and then Freeze. And what this lets you do, if I freeze this first row at the top here, it means that if I had data right down to row 50 or beyond, I can scroll down the page and that row will always be frozen at the top. So if I'm looking at people down here, I don't have to scroll up and think, oh, what was column E? Oh yeah, column E was total. And then you scroll down and then have to think, oh, what was column G? And scroll back up again. So you can freeze rows. You can also freeze columns. If you're going the other way, if I wanted to go to View, Freeze, and one column as well, that would mean if I'm scrolling across, I got multiple data points, I can still see the name of the person that I'm looking at as I scroll across. There's two little handy things to know. But I'll turn those off because we are not, that won't help us at the moment because we're all staying within this window anyway. But in terms of the data that's there, formatting it to make it look a bit easier to read, and also freezing the rows and the columns can make it easier, especially on larger data sets. You can, obviously, if you don't want to use the alternating colors, you can still do it manually. So I could select this top row and change the color entirely to different colors if I want to. But as with a lot of the Google stuff, with the Explore tool in Google Slides, which we'll look at tomorrow, and with templates and things like that, they've got designers that work at Google who basically want to save you time. So rather than you having to individually go to each one of these rows and change the colors, just use the built-in functionality to do that for you, basically, and it should look pretty nice with very minimal effort. So in terms of colouring, I also want to look at conditional formatting. So that changes the colour of the cells based on the contents of that cell. So if we look at total, if we look at column E, I don't think I've specified, yeah, there we go, so I have, yeah, so column E relative to their scoring. If you look at column E, so that's from E2 down to E10. Now, if we say that anything over 45 is a green, so it's kind of a pass. Anything between, let's say, what have I got? I got one thing. So if we say anything above 45 is a pass, and anything 40 to 45 is kind of a yellow, so it's a okay, but not the best. And anything below 40 is maybe a fail. It doesn't matter. It just helps you to, whether it's pass, fail, or whether it's just something that you want to keep an eye on because it didn't get to a certain point. Conditional formatting can help you do that. So I select the cells that I want to apply these colors and this formatting to. So that's these cells here. I can then go to Format and Conditional Formatting down here. If I click on Conditional Formatting, it'll bring this menu up on the right-hand side. And by default, it just gives you, if the cell is not empty, it makes it green. So don't stress out that suddenly all of your columns have gone green. That's just the default condition that it gives you. So let's really quickly go through what's here. You can choose single color or a color scale. I'd rather show you single color because it helps you to understand the way that conditional formatting works, and then you can kind of play around with these kind of midpoints to give you a sliding scale of colors. But if we just stick with single color for now, it tells you what range this is going to apply to. So if you're doing this for a massive amount of data, so maybe you've got from E2 to E500, you don't have to click and don't have to manually do it on here. You can go and change the range here. So I could change it to E500, for example, and then it's going to apply all the way down to E500. The reason it doesn't change right now is because the format rule, so we're looking at here, is if it's not empty. So if there's something in that cell, it's going to turn it green. So all the way from E2 to E500. I'm going to leave it as E2 to E10 because those are the only cells that we need to worry about. And if you come down, format cells if, and we'll have a look at all the different options. Now, there's a lot here. I'm not going to go through them all. You can have a look at these if you want to. All we're going to look at is some of these here. So if the cell, if any of these cells have got a number in them that's greater than, or you can choose greater than or equal to. So we say greater than, and what we're going to say 45, I think. So if we say, yeah, greater than 45, you can choose the formatting style. So we've got the default is green. You can click on there, and they've got green, yellow, and red as standard default formatting, but you can change it. I'm going to leave the default ones, but you can change everything from the color, the font, whether it's bold or italic. You can change all of the formatting, but I'm going to leave it as black text in a green background. So if the content of any of these cells is larger than 45, I want it to be this color. And then I'm going to say done. We need another rule for the same cells, E2 to E10. And I'm going to say, if this is greater than, do we say 40, I think? I want it to be yellow. So I chose greater than 40 and said yellow. These haven't changed though. 53, 54, 46. Those are greater than 40, but they're not yellow. The reason for that, when I say done, conditional formatting works based on hierarchy. So this green formula, which is if it's greater than 45, turn that cell green, is above the yellow if it's greater than 40 formula. And basically that means that the green one is more important. So this is what gets looked at first. If I move them, so if I move the green formula underneath the yellow one, that's the most important one. So they're all going to turn yellow other than 39. But if my green formula is above my yellow formula, it means that this is the most important condition. So if it's greater than 45, make it green. If it's greater than 40, secondly, if it's greater than 40, turn it yellow. What you can do, if you want, if I just go and do the last one for red, there is the option to say is between, which is down here. So you could, if you wanted to, again, this comes down to how you want to explain it to the pupils, whether you want to kind of let them do the way that Google Sheets does it, or whether you want to kind of show them the technically correct way first. If I choose is between, I could, for yellow, for example, have said if it's between 40 and 45, so that it doesn't actually contradict the other condition. It just comes down to what you're happy with explaining to the pupils, essentially. But in Google Sheets, if you've got one condition above the other one, then it doesn't matter that they conflict in terms of what they're saying. The one higher up the list is the one that's going to take priority. And for my last formula, I'm going to say less than. Now, if I said less than 40, which quite a lot of people would choose, if I just go to choose red here, now it's going to work here, but there is a mistake, and it's just something to remember. It's surprising how much you see this as a mistake, essentially. Is that I've got this, if the value is greater than 40, make it yellow. If the value is less than 40, make it red. Just be mindful of the fact that what if it's 40? If it's 40, then that's going to just go white. There's not going to be any conditional formatting. So you can either say if it's less than 41, or you've got the option of less than or equal to 40. So just bear that in mind. It's when you get overlapping. So you see it quite a lot when people say, how old are you? Are you between 16 and 25 or 25 to 40? If you're 25, which category do you put yourself into? I think most of us would put us into the 16 to 25 if we had a choice. But just bear in mind with those crossover numbers and making sure that you account for them, essentially, and you don't leave stranded kind of numbers between two formulas. So I'll say done, and what we've got now is 3 different conditions: greater than 45, greater than 40, or equal to or less than 40. And then these columns now are either green, yellow, or red. These can be really handy. I work with quite a few schools who've got lots of data to analyse, and you'll end up with spreadsheets with hundreds of rows and columns, and they need to analyse, quickly be able to see any standout behaviours in terms of good or bad performances. So having color-coded just makes it nice and easy for you to quickly scan through, and the red cells, for example, will jump out to you, and it makes it nice and easy for you to see which pupils might need your attention, or just basically which data stands out most for you. So in terms of this data here and formatting and things like that, that's it, other than adding one thing at the very end. But for now, I just want to look at graphs with you. So let's have a look. The first thing that asks me to do is create a suitable graph that shows the overall score of each pupil. So I'm going to want the data from this column and the data from this column, because I want the names of everybody and their total scores. Now to do that, if I click on column A, if I click Shift, which I showed you earlier, it's going to select everything between these points. If I click on column A, hold down Control or Command on a Mac, and click on E, it's going to individually select column A and column E. And again, this is exactly the same if you've got a list of documents or any kind of list of things. You can hold down Control and individually select items without selecting all the ones between as well. So click on column A, hold down Command or Control, click on column E, and then at the top, we've got this chart option up here. I'm going to click on that. And chances are it's going to give me the right one right off the bat, because this is a pretty simple set of data. It's names and total scores. So this just drops a chart right on here. We can move it around a little bit, pop it down here, so it's just out of the way. There are loads of things that we can play around with. So on the right hand side, you get this chart editor. The default it'll give you based on the data. It'll look at the data that's there and think what is the most suitable one. We can click on column chart and see all of the different types of columns that we can have, or bar charts if we wanted to do it left to right. There's pie charts in here, there's scatter charts. Really good one is map. So if you're doing anything on kind of the population of the world, you can do a chart which essentially shows different colors for different countries based on things like their population or any data around that country. And there's all sorts of different charts down the bottom as well. Radar charts, some of these I have absolutely no idea what exactly they do. Never in my life, I don't think, used a candlestick chart. Most of the popular ones will be at the top here, your lines and bar and column charts. So you pick your chart that you want, and then over in the customize option, this is where you can play around with the way it looks a little bit if you want to. If you want to chart style, you can do things like change the background color if you want to something a little bit different. You can change the font that's used on the text in the chart. You can make it 3D if you want a little bit of a return to maybe the late 90s, early 2000s. You can have a 3D look to your chart if you want to. There's all sorts of different kind of color options that you've got, and you can change things like the titles, the axis titles. So I don't think we've got any on here, but you can add things like chart title within the chart. You can go to the horizontal and vertical axis and put a name in. So you can put things, if you've got, one thing that's handy is if you've got long names on here, you can slant them. So we could say, for example, 30 degrees, and it will slant the names. So especially things like, I mean, Jonathan isn't a particularly long name, but it helps to make that a little bit more readable. And again, you can play around with all of the font sizes and stuff in here if you want to. But straight off, this chart is probably basically just what we want. So for this, we're going to leave it as is. So let's close this chart. The second one that I want to do, which is only slightly more complicated, is create a graph that tracks each pupil's score over the 3 tests. So this gives you a total. It shows you quite easily that Tim got the highest score. But if you want to see performance over those 3 test results, which is sometimes slightly more important to see did people improve, I'm going to want the data from A1. So bear in mind if you've got lots of data underneath here. So the reason I've written my instructions over on the side here is because if I had them written underneath, if I selected the entire column, it's also going to include all of this text that's down here. So it's going to get confused about, well, we've got these 9 people up here, but we've got all this other weird text that it doesn't know what to do with. So if you are selecting an entire column by clicking on the column letter at the top, just bear in mind, have you got anything underneath there that you don't want? If there is text underneath here that you don't want to include in your graph, then we can just click on A1 and hold down Shift and click on D10, and it will just select that information there. So just be mindful about what else is around here. So I'm going to click on chart again, and it gives me something. It's not particularly readable. It essentially, what it does is gives me the total broken down into how much we scored for each one. This could potentially replace this chart if you wanted to see how that split was. But to be honest, it's pretty hard to differentiate between. You can see that George had probably the lowest score, I think, on test number 2. But as these start and end in different places, this gets kind of hard to compare. So it may replace the column chart that you've got behind here, but it definitely doesn't work for this task. So I want to track their performance over the 3 tests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it from a stacked column chart to a line. Use a line chart. This is, it's the type of chart I want, but it's backwards. It's giving me the people's names across the bottom, and then their scores for each different test are up here. So yes, it does show me that, for example, Tim did really well on test number 1, but he actually did worse on the other 2, but it's still not the easiest to read. So what I'm going to do is I want it the other way around. So I want people's names down here, and I want their scores to show across here for the tests. So what I'm going to do is come down, and we've got this option to switch rows and columns. If I pop a tick in there, this is much more like what I want to see. I can see, for example, Tim, like we said, he started out really strong, but then has come down in the middle, and there's a slight uptick at the end. The only problem with this chart is basically all this wasted space at the bottom here. So thankfully for this class, nobody scored less than 10 on any of these tests. So we've got this point down here that's completely wasted. So what I can do is pop over to customize, and then on the vertical axis, which is this axis here, so the up and down axis, you can put in a minimum value. So by default, it'll always start at 0. But I can put a minimum value of 10. All that's going to do is get rid of all the wasted space at the bottom. Sometimes this can be used to be a little bit misleading. Sometimes people can put minimum numbers there, and you might assume that the bottom counts as 0. So just bear that in mind to make it really clear that 10 is at the bottom and there's basically nothing below that. But what this does now is it makes it a little bit clearer for me to see all of this data rather than it being all squashed up in the top half of the view. It's given me kind of a boring chart title. It's just said test 1, test 2, and test 3. I can double click on that to bring up my text editor and then say tracking tests 1, 2, and 3, for example. Or whatever you want to call it. It's completely up to you. And that's it. I'm happy with how this looks. So I'm just going to close the chart editor, and I'm just going to pop this one just down here. So just click and drag and move that down to there. So now we've got all our data nice and easy to read. We've got our conditional formatting done. We've got 2 charts to track the data. And the last thing I want to show you is I won't cover number 9 at the moment. I can do if we've got a little bit of time at the end. I can show you that if you want. But the more important one, and the one that's not going to completely fry people's brains, is this Sparkline graph. Now I'm pretty sure this is unique to Google Slides. I don't think Excel and other spreadsheet platforms have this. But what it does, it basically is in column H, create a Sparkline bar graph. Line graph. So what I'm going to do, let me show you what one is, because it'll be immediately apparent, because you're probably scratching your head thinking, what is a Sparkline graph? If I just type in Sparkline at the top here, watch what happens as well, in that it knows that this is an additional column in this same kind of mini table. So it does the colors and the formatting and everything for us. Now all I need to do is type in equals. I'm going to do a formula. If I type in the word Sparkline, what I want to do essentially is replicate this graph. I want to do a line graph for these 3 test scores, but I want it just to appear inside this cell. So the cells that I want are B2 to D2. If I close the bracket, what it does is it puts a little mini line graph inside this cell. And then I can click on the little box in the corner, drag it down. And it just gives you a general kind of overview of how they've done. So it's this data. If you imagine you've got 50 or 60 people who've done a test, this is already reasonably crowded with 9 people. So if you want the same kind of outcome, you want to know have people improved or not as part of a test, putting a Sparkline in the end can give you just like a really nice clear way of seeing how they've performed. Deborah, for example, has got much better. She didn't really understand the topic to start with, but now she's improved. Whereas we've got, Tim, who started out really strong. Maybe that was a fluke because he went down pretty drastically then and then leveled out. So these are handy. What the Sparkline bar graph does, if you're interested in all of the other Sparkline kind of things that you can do, because it's more than just lines and bars, in that PDF that I gave you, if I just open it up here, in this PDF, right at the bottom, there's a link under Sparklines here. If I click on it, this Google Support article, it will give you all of the different potential syntax, basically, for these mini graphs that you can have. So lines, bars, columns. You can also select the minimum and maximum values, all of these different kind of parameters that you can set. So if you are interested in all of the different kind of graphs and things you can put in, feel free to go and play around with this. The actual formula for doing the bar graph is this one here. So basically, what it's doing is equals sparkline, same as we had before. What it's essentially doing is it's filling up this cell 73. I think this example in this PDF. So there's 4 tests. So it's a result out of 80. So it's filling up the cell 73 points out of 80. So the maximum is 76. So maximum score they could have got is 76 on this test. So the chart type is a bar, and the maximum this cell holds is 76, and it fills it up 73 points out of 76. So you can have this kind of sparkline bar graph as well if you wanted to in there.